welcome. It's roundup day at SHOWstudio, so we're going to be discussing all the best menswear action from the most recent menswear shows. Obviously starting with London because that's the best city. I've got an amazing set of panellists with me ready to dissect and unpick some of the highlights and the lowlights of London menswear. Not that there are any lowlights, but I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with Mr. Alex Fury.
Hi, I'm Alex Fury. I'm the fashion editor of The Independent.
I'm Charlie Porter, I'm men's fashion critic of the FT.
I'm Gordon Richardson, the creative director of Top Man.
And I'm William Oliver, the editor of District MTV.
You'll go very serious at that bit. It always worries me a little bit. I know you're going to be really embarrassed by this, Gordon, but I want to start with you because without Top Man, LCM definitely wouldn't happen. So firstly, thank you on behalf of everyone who loves men's fashion.
Well, it's also thanks to a lot of other people who've contributed to that, making it a great day. But yeah, it's something we're really proud of now, isn't it? In the industry, we've kind of forged ahead and we've created a day that's equal, if not better, than Milan and Paris at the moment. And it's producing the most exciting designs, that's for sure. Yeah,
no, for sure. When you say the most exciting designs, I'm going to put you on the spot now and say, did you have any particular highlights?
Do you know what, that's always hard because a lot of them are sort of friends in some respects, because I think the best thing about menswear is like we're a family to a degree. And I think it's just great watching young designers mature and establish their markets, from Craig Green to, you know, at the other end of the spectrum, Lou Dalton, to sibling in between. And then you've got Nazir and you've got Katie Earin. There's going to be others that I haven't mentioned that we're obviously all going to discuss today, but a lot of them are just changing the face of menswear and changing the way men are going to look in the future. The proportions are all sort of changed, the fabrications, the styling, the colouring, the print work. It's just exciting times. And the best thing about it is it's got so much more to give.
Oh, for sure.
You know, we're not looking at something that's static, it's something that's just going to move forward. And people are just pushing the boundaries, and I love just to see that. So I've mentioned a few, but I mean there's very many more that we could be discussing today. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about London is we leave London on after 3 days and go to Milan. From Milan onwards, we don't see a single new name.
No, completely.
And it's a total thing where in London over a day you'll see 5, 6, 7 new or only just establishing names, and then you leave and it's the same names that you used to read about as a kid. Like, you know, there's no development on, so it's a real imbalance, and it's really exciting that there's such a strange imbalance, because what is here in London will now be the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Do you find that with your audience, somewhere like District MTV, where it is a kind of a younger audience, do you find that London's one of the only menswear cities they care about because it is the kind of cool new names?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that London is also kind of the only city that we really focus on very heavily. I mean, we will do coverage of the other cities as well, but ultimately it's those kind of young, emerging designers and people who are doing really exciting things that are relevant to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alex, you have no problem holding back, so tell me, what were your highlights of the week? Your names.
I really liked Craig Green. I really liked Christopher Shannon. Those were the two that really stood out kind of head and shoulders.
Should we start by talking about Christopher Shannon, because this is something we can talk about later with the scheduling issue that we always have, because you know, Christopher Shannon got a tough time this season because his slot was when a lot of people had jetted off.
Should I give the back? Basically, Pitti. There's a thing in Florence called Pitti, which is a long-standing menswear trade show, and London Collections kind of overlaps it, especially in winter. And they paid for people to get on what I was calling the scab plane straight after Burberry to be able to get to Pitti to be able to see anything. And Christopher's show was 2 hours after Burberry. So. But the thing was, actually, his audience was completely rammed, and apart from some American names and stuff, I don't actually think it did him that much harm. I don't think. I think he actually rose above it. I was worried that there'd be no one there, but actually it was. And
there was so much buzz around his show. Why was it a highlight for it? Because everyone seems to be nodding, and we all seem to be in agreement that it was amazing. Can we scroll through a little bit? Just have a look. Thanks, Liam. What stood out for you?
I think it's very interesting that he does. On the one hand, he does a very specific look extremely well, but on the other hand, there's actually a lot of depth to that. I think you look at it superficially, it registers as sportswear, but actually there's such a depth of design to it that it's not simplistic at all. And I think having kind of the confidence to play with such sort of basic items of clothing, and particularly I like the fact that the stuff that was supposed to look cheap looked cheap, like. The tracksuits looked cheap, but in that fantastic way that it was referencing almost in a you know, the way that when Rei Kawakubo uses a cheap fabric, she uses it inherently for that cheapness.
Yeah.
It felt like there was a similar sort of intellectual approach to it. And he'll probably hate me saying it's intellectual, but I think there's a lot of thought behind it, but also it's incredibly relatable. And I think getting that balance is really interesting and actually really difficult. It didn't feel alienating, while at the same time it was actually pushing some sort of quite forward-thinking ideas, like the dress for men that we've seen everywhere.
Yeah.
But I think the way that Chris did it, and also kind of trouser hybrids, look really questioning garments. It was just, but also questioning them in this very interesting, almost playgroundish way of tying a sweater around your waist, and the way that if you fuse that with trousers, it becomes this very interesting trouser, skirt, jacket hybrid. It was just very, very complex.
Yeah. That gender issue you mentioned, that seems to be something, as you said, that runs through a lot of the London shows, and a lot of the most exciting ones. You know, Astrid Anderson always plays with gender and sexuality in an incredibly interesting way, and obviously J.W.
But I think it's quite interesting that it's not so much playing with gender as it's playing with the engendered ideas we have of certain garments, the idea that a dress is a woman's garment rather than a man's garment, and why it couldn't be when it did used to be, and in some cultures it still is. There was a lot of that kind of questioning going on. And that great sort of Daily Mail baiting that you know that they're all going to hate this, but at the same time it's
they still do it. The designers still do it. No one sees that as a shame. Everyone sees it as a hat I got on it. Yeah.
Well, I'm just like, if you're pissing off the Daily Mail,
then that's the thing to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, because that's what we're calling the dress there, and it's kind of a sweater with like a long kind of knitted flat front bit. It's interesting.
A long sweater. Really,
yeah, exactly. And it's really, he looked really
hot
on
on me. I did try it.
You tried it?
Did you actually put it on?
No, we held it up, and yeah, it sort of had a train on me. So it's for a certain body type, not mine.
Well, I was going to say, and this is an awful word when you apply it to a collection of designers, you know, they're in a trade to sell designs, but it is actually very wearable, although we just talked about a sweater dress. One always homes in on that, but if you disseminate the whole collection, dissect it, there's a lot of really good, interesting, easy stuff to wear.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a bad thing, you know, I think that's really good. But it's totally him.
But also
so it has that character. Simplicity and character are really hard to kind of marry, and he does that really well.
Really well.
But it's also complexity as well, because in the showroom I was thinking, okay, that tracksuit won't have the thing attached, because those kind of bits tied around, they're actually sewn on, and some had like 3 or 4 tops attached to the bottom, and in the showroom that's what it was. My favourite one, which is the orange one,
it's got with the trousers.
The trousers, but it's got something hanging off the back, and that's what it is. You know, it's quite this one here in the middle. Yeah, that thing hanging off the back is attached, and that's what you buy if you buy it.
I think it's great.
I mean, it's quite interesting that with Chris as well, when he does that, he's actually building kind of multiple garments together. So it's sort of, you're talking about it being a kind of gender thing or the sweater dress, but ultimately he's actually combining very inherently masculine kind of pieces and putting them together to create a different thing, as opposed to somebody like J.W. Anderson, who's actually playing directly with sort of gender roles, I suppose.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about J.W. Anderson as you bring him up, because obviously this was an interesting season, given that he's just had, a big cash flow in from LVMH, and I think we all saw that reflected in the kind of the fabrications and the finishes, definitely. But was this a strong show? What did you think of it, Alex? Because you're a fan, aren't you?
I am a fan. I did like the show. I thought it was interesting, the focus on accessories, and same, we thought it was well made. It was well made. It's also very expensive.
Yeah.
It's the price point for the small triangular bags, I think they're 1,350 euros.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it's a high price point, which I guess is this idea of taking it up and building it into an LVMH luxury brand in its own right.
I actually thought the accessories were the least well-made thing. I thought the bucket bags were really kind of quite simplistic.
For me, it was more the focus on them.
Yeah, the focus was interesting, but the thing for me was the clothes were exceptionally made, and it was interesting that I've felt before that the clothes felt a bit like, okay, well that will do, whereas the finish on them was really exceptional, and I thought that was quite an extraordinary move forward. It certainly was interesting as well to see that. Cash injection in London, it was like 9 AM in the morning, and then to go to the shows that followed it and see clothes that people have had to make in a factory around the corner in East London, and
studio.
Yeah, exactly, and you can see what having that investment just does for a designer.
But then I think it's dangerous to think that that's something that all designers should aspire to.
Yeah, absolutely, But I think it's very good for him and his brand. The thing I felt with this, I felt I felt like I do when I sometimes see a Tom Brown show. Like I felt that the kind of and when that was specific about the shoes, which were all, what were they now? Were they loafers? I think they were all loafers on a massive platform. And they were all very. It was something that was meant to kind of infuriate in a way, and which is what Tom does as well often, and quite Tom does it gleefully, and
a bit of an irritant in the mix.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not meant to feel welcome or warm in this world. It's meant to be unsettling, and I think it being better made it a more interesting world to be in.
Well,
is that that kind of compliment?
I think it is. I mean, he's always trying to show things that aren't the norm, isn't he? So he bucks what's sort of happening, and he plays with proportions and silhouettes and the whole masculinity of menswear. And to me, this was the most accessible of his collections, if that's the right thing to apply to him, because maybe he sets his stall by something else, and to say that might be derogatory from his point of view, that he doesn't want it to be that. But I did think this one was the one that, were you not a fan of his in the past, it would sort of lead you in a little bit more and allow you to sort of see what was good about the collections, whereas before you may have just blanked and go, this is not for me, I don't understand this world. So there were pieces in there very good. There's still some very feminine traits, I think, that come through that I don't always understand, but
I think it's interesting as well, though. You look at some of the feminine stuff, and actually that's stuff that was taken from, he said it was about aristocratic portraiture, and when you look at kind of the cape coats and things like that, actually that looks quite feminine, but it was taken from 18th century capes, so it's quite interesting, that sort of, which again is questioning what we view as engendered garments now, and in the past it wasn't quite as restrictive. So I think that's something quite interesting in that.
I thought these were the most interesting pieces. These, which were actually the first three that came out. This one's at the bottom, and that was. I think they weren't at the sides, were they? They were kind of.
Yeah, they were like a
tabard over the top,
which is almost like Tudor costume in a sense. That seems very historical. It doesn't. But then it felt very new to see it.
Yeah, these have stayed with me, and I think it's the first time that his clothing has actually stayed with me, and I've thought about it in a kind of. It's resonated in some way. I thought they were interesting and also exceptionally made as well.
What was your take on it, William?
I felt like it was interesting what you were saying, actually, because I felt like it was almost a bit of a best of from lots of other kind of collections that he's done, and perhaps the accessibility came through from looking back at certain pieces and what kind of worked, and then as he moves on with the cash injection, it's maybe about taking what's really worked for him and kind of working on that and then alleviating it.
No, there was a lot of kind of typical him in it, which I thought was nice to see, that kind of continued focus on proportion and architecture, as he calls it, and those feminine elements. But I think, Gordon, what you were saying is spot on. It didn't feel like as intimidating as some of his other collections, I don't think. If you pull it apart, there's a lot.
I think once you ignore the shoes.
Yeah.
And the silks as well.
No, I think it still was intimidating. I think maybe looking at it straight on, it seems less so, but I think it still was.
I still much less than it has been. For me, I was much less uncomfortable with the clothes than I have been, and once I adjusted my eye and just didn't look at the shoes, which I wasn't into. I'm not a fan of men in heels generally. I have issues with Cuban heels. I have issues with platforms, definitely, on men, and they seemed a little bit disconnected to the rest of the garments.
But why do you love to see feminine elements in the clothes but not in the shoes? Is that like the last taboo?
I just think the feminine elements in the clothes are much more subtle, and the feminine elements in the shoe are a great big whacking platform on the bottom. And also I think he talked a little bit about the idea of it elevating the man and being connected with this aristocratic portraiture, which is something that Vivienne Westwood said about her portrait collection in 1990, which was the idea that she wanted it to look as if the women had stepped onto a pedestal. So I felt a little bit of deja vu to be told that's what the shoes were about, when really they felt gimmicky to me. But equally, when I said that he's moving to Loewe, which is known for its accessories, and there's a very interesting focus on accessories in this, and then they reappeared in the women's wear, where I'm sure they will sell very well.
I still don't know who the man is that wears it. I still don't know what that man is, and that didn't answer itself on the catwalk.
But there were pieces in this collection, I think, which came through and did give more, perhaps, than that has happened previously. Like the florals here.
Yeah, if you scroll downwards,
those three pieces. I mean, those three really stood out for me. I was actually quite obsessed with one of those looks.
I think as well there's this very commercial backbone to it, which, I mean, this looks commercial, but then there's an even more commercial backbone. The knitwear stuff that Charlie pointed out from the start is, you know, they have them as a sweater. It's a sweater with a diagonal stripe.
That'll be an effect.
And that's, you know, in the same way that his window pane check sweaters have become kind of so ubiquitous. Because they're easily boiled down and easily sold to lots
and
of
also when you
retailers.
cut it out on the front on a product page of an online store, they look very
yeah, exactly, nice, you know, graphic with these big graphic slash, big graphic checks. You know, there is that very strong base of knitwear that he sells loads of to men. You might all shout at me, but I mean, I do feel with Jonathan that, I do, that ultimately there's a lot of show, and then actually what comes out of that and what ends up selling or what ends up being the kind of popular pieces are the much more toned down things. And it's almost like the show is there to sort of start this conversation off and to draw the attention. He said with those ruffled shorts he sold like 3 pairs of them. And it was like, that's, you know, ultimately there's the showing collection and the selling, which is actually quite an old-fashioned
It's an understood way. Like, I mean, that's what Com do. Like, I was in Dover Street looking at which women's pieces they've got from that amazing women's show, and they've got 3 on mannequins. Then this whole selling collection around. So that's an understood.
But I don't think it's so.
It's very. But it's still. I don't feel a cult of. I don't feel a kind of heart within it.
You say it's something that's well established. I do agree with you, but I think it feels a bit different in London. Maybe it's a financial thing. You know, designers can't produce this runway collection and a huge commercial collection as well. So I do agree with what he does with this kind of big show and then selling something completely different. It feels a bit different to what we see elsewhere, where what you see on, you know, Aggie and Sam or
I mean, the thing is, he's got a massive women's wear collection as well, and that, you know, I think it's very much a women's wear point of view is to have a big showy show, and then to have a commercial, you know, have an enormous commercial collection that can back that up and can boil it down. It's also, in a sense, I don't want to say a bit old-fashioned, but it certainly to me harks back to the 90s when there were these big massive shows, and then there was an enormous collection that had elements taken from that show, but very seldom was a full show look, which I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it sort of infuriates me when you see people wearing a full catwalk look, as if, you know, they've just cut out a picture from online and bought it exactly.
Business of Fashion about street style and how that's become, you know, like almost like a editorial in a magazine. People wear a head-to-toe look now. There's actually no real kind of pulling things apart, which is quite interesting, that kind of idea of a head-to-toe.
I like, you know, I mean, sometimes I am very into getting the catwalk thing, but I really like it when you go to a showroom and see the pieces that didn't make it onto the catwalk, or the pieces that have come out of that and that have been developed on from it. I think it's interesting to go and see that depth, or even pieces you didn't really notice. I think with what Craig does, maybe you don't notice.
I was going to say, we could talk about head to toe. Craig's look is head to toe. I mean, like it's a. But
as a designer, you start out with some sort of theme, something that you kind of hinge your collection around. And within that, some things are going to work and some things aren't going to work. And, it depends at what point you pursue those things, whether you're going to pursue the things that are more courageous or less courageous. It's not a game, but it's a very difficult psychological thing to map out. Like you were saying, you're either going to do showman's kind of thing, or you're going to sit back and do more reserved kind of things. But any collection is a summary of those thoughts for that season, and they don't necessarily need to sort of be the collection that summarises you as a constant designer. You can make mistakes.
I think as well, the show is your statement rather than...
It's a statement of that. It's just that moment in time. It's your feelings and everything that's come together in that moment of time. And as I say, some work and some don't. The interesting thing about JW is the fact that palette is quite masculine. There aren't colours in there that are... Sorry, I know we're going to go on to this.
No, it's fine.
It's actually interesting that for the femininity that's within it, to a degree, the palette is relatively straightforward.
There's no pink. There's no Pepto-Bismol pink.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. But that's something we've seen. I thought that was what was quite striking about the shorts collection that everyone talks about, because the palette for that as well, you know, that kind of that camel, that's
but
such
the
a
fabrics as well, it was duffel. You know,
so there's something he kind of brings back down into that kind of masculine world. But then changes it.
Maybe what's unique about him, maybe this is just me being a bit sort of simplistic, but I don't think there's very many designers working in London, even though we create a lot of stars and we encourage people to kind of leave college and set up their own things straight away, there aren't many designers that have this kind of cult of personality around them in the way that Jonathan does. You know, a lot of the designers, even though they're kind of working from a very young age and they become very successful very quickly.
Yes, he's been very willful since the beginning.
Yeah.
He's wanted to be a designer from the beginning. That's his own path, isn't it?
But other designers have as well, but I don't think they put
No, not
themselves
at all. I
out
mean,
there.
if we go back to Craig, I was talking with him yesterday about it, and he's doing, this is the way he's expressing himself at the moment through fashion. Craig has never wanted to be necessarily a fashion designer.
Yeah.
Jonathan wants to be a fashion designer in the old-fashioned sense of the word. Craig just wants to make stuff.
Makes
And at the
sense.
moment, he's found that by doing it through clothing, he's able to make the most extraordinary thing that he might not be able to do in other disciplines. I mean, you know, I use the word exceptional for Jonathan's work, but that was made by a factory somewhere that had a lot of long lead time. These pieces were hand painted in their studio three times separately, folded, squished, baked, folded, squished, like painted. Like the process to make these things was just absolutely extraordinary.
It's like a craftsman to a degree, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember he came into our studio many years back, and he made this patchwork quilt, extraordinary thing, just out of denim, and it was like, how did you do that? And he didn't just sew it together in a random way. He'd considered every single piece to it. So it was like this marquetry blanket, but in denims, which we wanted to put in the window. And so you could see the craftsmanship coming out of him, and that's what he's done in every successive collection, isn't it? He's pursued that, what we'd call sort of fabric manipulation, which is a dreadful sort of terminology before it. So it's not just the cut and the silhouette and proportions and the look. There's a lot that goes into the fabrications as well.
And there's the close people
as
doing.
well. Conceptually, there's so much as well, I think, with Craig.
I think the other thing that's interesting is even with all of that fabric manipulation, and you do sometimes see people that do those sort of things and it ends up being just something you want to hang on the wall, because also it's hideously expensive, and it's, you know, and they
but
haven't
actually this
considered,
isn't though.
but this
No,
isn't.
it's
It's not hideously expensive. It's light and it's wearable.
It's
you know,
incredibly
I think there's
wearable.
this idea that there's a realism to all of that. All that experimentation has a point.
Yeah.
It's not just a big wank project like it is with lots of other people. He wants to dress people. And that's really exciting and compelling, and that's, I think, gives a depth to his clothes that a lot of people don't have. It's not a two-dimensional thing to hang on a wall, it's something you want to get inside.
Well, when I was talking to him afterwards, he was talking about you know, what had kind of inspired him and what does inspire him, and very much that comes from, you know, him growing up in his family and the kind of workmen that are around him and that side of things. So, you know, it is ultimately coming from very wearable,
very real clothes.
And he's incredibly humble as a designer. I think that's one thing that's so great about Craig, is he's incredibly confident, and, you know, he has this real innate belief in what he does, obviously, but he's so humble and so you know, he really, I think what's brilliant about him is he uses the skills of other people so effectively. You know, Helen Lawrence, who does his knit.
Who's about to be a fashionista.
Exactly.
For the first time,
She's a friend from St Martin's, and as Charlie said, she's about to do fashion. She's an amazing designer, and he's so, you know, to kind of call on all these people that he worked with.
That's one of her sweaters in the bottom right corner. That's a Helen Lawrence
and
knit
she's
for Craig.
She's amazing.
The interesting thing about this as well is that, you know, we immediately start talking that it starts being Bobby
Yeah,
Abbey
we've
in the
got Bobby
bottom right.
coming.
So that's
Slight
different.
change.
That's not Craig in the. But the interesting thing about if you can scroll up a bit, so we can just see Craig on the screen.
Thanks, Liam.
The interesting thing is that we talk straight away about the print and the thing, but actually half that screen is black. And that was the amazing thing about the collection, was that there's this whole other world that, because your eye is drawn by this incredible work on the surface of the fabric, you then see these other pieces. And what he's done is he's dropped the shoulder on the jacket. I think that coat on the top, the black one in the middle. He does this amazing unlined, super flat blazer, which I've got one of from autumn winter last year, which is the comfiest, most amazing thing, and suits anyone. He's got actual pieces which aren't about, this is what I can do with surface. It's actually about shape, and I was talking with Craig about this, I think he's got a really good sense of the body that wears clothes, and also about his own body and what he thinks about his own body. And there are some designers who are really uncomfortable about their body, and then they make clothes that are uncomfortable because there's not that feeling of kind of assuredness. And Craig's clothes are there as well as there. They're not just a 2D thing. There's a third dimension to it.
Definitely.
But I think as well, for me, the really interesting thing with this whole show was the play on proportion. It was really about resetting your eye to this proportion, and I also loved the fact that his show notes talked about opulence and ceremony, and when it came out, you were like, that's exactly the words I would have used to describe it, that's exactly what it felt like. Which is great because you read a lot of crap that people write in show notes that just means nothing, but this, it just felt so perfect.
But when you say opulence, that's such a different type of opulence to what we expect when we say opulence in fashion in crap show notes.
But I mean, the thing is also Craig's of the generation to have grown up only knowing fashion as luxury. Like it's the whole thing of like luxury only became fashion in the way we know it in the mid-90s, and fashion doesn't have to be about luxury. So something could be opulent without it being here's a fur or here's a thing, or you know, this world that we live in where we go to these shows by these brands of stuff we can never afford and we pretend it's normal. You know, Craig's actually doing stuff which is of relevance.
I mean, also if you're hand painting, hand printing, folding, you know, using all of those techniques on that fabric, then that is opulence in itself as well.
I thought the print looks incredibly opulent. You know, it's just but at the same time, what you said, Charlie, is absolutely right. It's a different language of opulence, which is, and I think that the whole thing that is really fascinating here is him playing with these kind of ideas. Also, I love the fact that really there's a lot of suits there, and it's Craig's version of a suit, which I went into that show and really wanted to see that from him. In a really weird way, I was dying to know what he would do as a suit. And then this came out and I was like, this is his version of a suit.
It's fascinating. This whole season when we went abroad, there were so many people not doing suits. So whenever you saw someone doing suit like Conwell Jr. and Craig, when you saw anyone actually doing
really
tailoring, because they're like, right, they
but it was the people you didn't expect to do suits who did suits, which is the real.
That shows such confidence, doesn't it? I think that's the thing with Craig, is it just feels so. You know, you said this was your favourite collection from him, and it felt such a. And obviously, this was his last season with Man as well, which is worth mentioning. And I think he's gone out kind of with such a bang, but in such a quiet kind of classic Craig way.
Well, he set his stall for the future, hasn't he? And he is a show that's the show you want to go and see, isn't it? As part of that whole mix. And the interesting thing, I think, is that we've reviewed 3 collections, haven't we? 3 designs, which are all completely different. As what we were saying right at the beginning, the diversity is extraordinary. And then you could look at that and then sort of talk about sibling as well in the same kind of context, about manipulating things, but they're doing it with yarn, you know, and that's their whole sort of ethos. It might be quite good to
let's go to
look
sibling
at
actually.
sibling.
Thanks, Liam. Have you got it open? This isn't a sibling.
Yeah, that was Top Man.
Yeah, that was Top Man.
I'll stay out of that conversation.
What was our take on sibling this season? I will go to you first, Alex, because.
I mean, I love Sibling. I love what Sibling do, and I love the technique. It didn't work entirely for me. I think their show notes talked about a kind of grittiness, and I sort of wanted that grittiness. I'm not sure if that's just me wanting something from a designer that really they don't want to do. And again, when you went to see it in the showroom, it was all wonderfully made,
it's
absolutely beautiful garments. But it didn't have that sort of grit, and I wanted to kind of see them do something a little bit different to what they've done previously. And so I think it was almost like having the show notes made me be a little bit disappointed. It wasn't quite what I wanted.
Working man.
There's this really horrible thing where you read show notes before a show, and then you get this idea in your head of what you want it to be, and their invite had a picture of a miner on it and things. And
it's so dangerous that when you create a sort of picture of something. I feel very anti sort of doing that nowadays. Like everyone knows everything about what you're going to show before you show it, and then they come in with
such preconceived.
And I love that whole
show notes was amazing.
But I love that whole theatre that you used to have, and I'm now sounding very old, where you didn't know really what to expect. And I think that's glorious. You go in and go, wow, it was great, or it wasn't. But there was no preconceived idea. But I thought there was some great.
I thought it was fabulous. I thought it was so ebullient and free, and like their world is one of fashion for pleasure, and I'm not sure why you want grit to be in that world of pleasure. I think it's got such a kind of powerful sense of freedom to it.
I love the crochet macrame knit.
I mean, their adoption of the smile as well recently, which they kind of really work, you know.
Then I think my issue with this was that I felt this was when fashion designers say they're going to do minors, this is what they think that a fashion designer will do, is that they'll do, you know, fluffy hot pants and things covered in Swarovski crystals and embroidered with feathers and things like that. It just felt like,
I think you're connecting Invite with show too much. I never look at invites at all. It doesn't. It's not part of a language.
No, but I think if
that's why I don't really care about influences either. Like it's what's on the catwalk that's important to me. It's whatever idea was before is kind of irrelevant.
But I think the idea that they're trying to get across, I judge on how that idea is communicated to me. And I didn't feel it was communicated, which again, you know, you go into the showroom and you pull it apart and there are amazing pieces. And I highlighted, you know, I wrote about, I think the sweater that's there on the left, I wrote about as this kind of really what they represent to me, which is this, you know, incredible craft knitting. And these amazing pieces that they're able to create, and they're doing things with craft knitting that's really influencing everybody else, and it's completely exceptional.
I love the micro. That's their dog micro.
But I just think for me, it didn't gel together as a show. It didn't work as a show. As garments, it worked.
I think
the dog's amazing. Can we just take a moment for the sibling dog, because it is incredible.
I think the thing with sibling is that they've gone through such a long process, because initially they only wanted to do sweaters, and so they were against doing a catwalk show, and then they realised that they actually wanted to do a catwalk show, and so it's been a long process of working that out, and now they're expanding. So there's denim in the collection, there's other pieces, so it's not just about knit. And I think they announced yesterday they're no longer calling the women's line sister by saying it's just sibling. Like they're being much more confident about what they are and who they are, and I think this collection was about expanding that world. The shows are certainly a lot longer, and the shows used to be like about 3 seconds long and really like showpiece, and actually this is more product. And I think it's the right thing for them to do. Was your issue, perhaps, we talked about this a little bit, was your issue maybe the styling of how it was presented?
I think there is actually a lot of product in there, and sometimes I don't think it's shown to its best advantage. There are some wonderful scarves rather, that look like they were unravelling, but you can't really see them. They're kind of lost. I think sometimes you feel like you want to edit it down, because then you go to the showroom and you see the individual pieces, and you kind of want those things that are great to be championed a little bit more.
It was actually that denim one that was my favourite piece in it, the bottom
I think they're probably at that turning point where, as Charlie said, they started off just being knitwear. They realised and believed they want to expand the collection into other areas. And they're at that turning point moment where they're just trying out those ideas, really. And yes, maybe editing would have helped that. But on the other hand, they may not have been able to have got all those ideas out. And just going back, Alex, to your previous remark about a theme, primarily a theme just gets you to that kind of a conversation with the clothes. It's not necessarily what you want to put. They're not trying to put miners out on the catwalk, I don't think, any more than we would when we explain what we're doing. It's just the nucleus of the starting point of an idea, and then that gives you all the inspiration for then what you do with your product. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to stamp that minor mark on something.
But I think you have to go away taking that with you. I think you want to communicate that message.
But you don't have to take that with you, do you? I think the collection then, when it's out there, becomes something else just by dint of it being there.
You do if it's forced down your throat, and if they came out in hard hats on and like whatever, you know, and cold faces, then maybe.
But see, I feel like it's
a miner's stripe.
I mean, I'm not sure when Mike off the dog goes to do with miners.
That's the idea. Is it's this very, if it had been completely abstracted, then that would be okay. And if it had been completely literal, then that would be okay. But it's occupying this very weird, for me, this very weird, confused area. I felt confused by it, and I think that's...
But if you took the theme out, what you knew, if you just took that away and just looked at that as it was and didn't know it was meant to relate to that,
would it... confusing. I think there's too much stuff. I feel that there's too much stuff there. And I wouldn't take... I think also without the theme, you do get that it's, you know, it's supposed to be a bit about tough times and hard work, you know, there's sort of...
But you've got little sections there of all the stripe kind of content. You've got the macrame, crochet knits, you've got the little denim stories. There are 3 or 4 stories in there.
But I think, you know, denim links to workwear, there's kind of long johns.
But denim's been part of fashion for like the last how many decades? I just see it's a fashion fabulous dream, you know, it's such a...
Fashion fabulous dream.
Yeah, but it's a workwear, you know, the way they use denim is different to the way Gaultier uses denim. It's denim there, or different to the way Valentino uses denim. It's handled in a very different way.
But then also reference, it's more for me what Kim did with denim, like when the mended denim, which didn't feel workweary. Anyway, I feel like we were really getting to my new side. But
this is great. It's like handbags at dawn.
Yeah, exactly.
But what's exciting about siblings, you just again want to see their next show.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They're one of those that you need to be at.
And they've consistently been that for so long as well. You know.
Definitely. I think. I like, just for a minute, I'd like to go back to Man, because we talked about Craig, which I think is quite apt that we talked about Craig and then we moved on from Man, because not to discredit the other designers, but Craig is the star. You know, you said this, Gordon, like he's the one we'll all want to see in the future, but I think currently he's also the reason everyone wants to go to Man, because Craig's so amazing. What was our take on the rest of the Man show?
I thought Bobby was great, and I thought Alan did a good job.
Alex?
I didn't like Bobby, I didn't like
Can we just
Alan.
scroll down a bit more so it's all Bobby? Thank you. You didn't like them?
I didn't like Bobby and I didn't like Alan.
What was your problem with... I think Bobby is what it is, isn't it?
I didn't like the mouthpieces at Bobby.
You see, and because the thing is, I think it's too much to kind of to cite them as a thing that's from McQueen, because for me they're nothing to do with McQueen, just because that's something that McQueen did. So what? I think he wanted to show aggression with sweetness. Like it serves a different purpose.
But I think it's incredibly similar to what Alexander McQueen did.
Yeah,
and it's a very it's a very famous thing that McQueen did. It just, I don't know. And more than that, more than anything, I found them unpleasant.
But do you not think the kind of people that, like, maybe this is a sad thing about fashion, but the kind of people who will be inspired and interested by this, and who will see it online or see it, you know, kind of on Instagram or whatever, they won't make that connection to McQueen. And whether we think that's valid or not, does that matter? Because the kind of people who will be really excited and inspired by this and probably want to buy it.
I think if it had been like a McQueen collection, then yes. If it had been like tailoring that was like this, or trying to do that in the clothing, but because the clothing is doing something completely separate with everything, that you would never put the two together. So I think that to kind of damn him for that, when here he's developing a language and a brand and an idea that will sell to a certain sort of man. I think it's what he's doing here is very interesting, and he's also someone who's like developing his own tropes, like the teddy bear repeats.
Yeah, the teddy bears.
I mean, also, I mean, we're talking hugely, or you know, about the mouthpiece, when actually there's a whole collection there to discuss. There's a darkness, there's a new darkness for him. There is, you know, there are consistent motifs, of course, but there is also a new kind of aesthetic really that he's playing with that he hasn't done previously, and I think that stands out more than discussing, you know,
but I
a singular
like,
mouthpiece that doesn't feel.
But then I feel like the mouthpiece was a styling gimmick, the same way that the shoes at JW Anderson were a
but
styling
what, you know,
gimmick,
okay,
and that they're distracting.
They are perhaps,
it's this
but
editing
then
thing. I just wish that designers.
No, I think it had a valid place. I actually think it was right for them to be there. I
didn't think it needed to be on every model.
I think that if you think about
I found it incredibly distracting.
The sort of this darker aesthetic, which is something that runs through a number of different designers, you know, and has been for the last few seasons, that kind of outstanding sort of facial jewellery, of however you want to look at it, is something that kind of communicates that message. And so maybe it isn't particularly right for you personally, but I think to communicate that message to, as Lou was saying, Instagram, or you know, on a wider field, I think it was the right choice.
And he's attracted. He wants, as Charlie says, a certain type of man. You know, I think the type of man that buys Bobby Abley, perhaps they want kind of that straight up impact. They're not going to be someone who's.
Well, it's the Givenchy guy, isn't it?
Yeah, he's not spent.
It's actually not just that. It's also the Jeremy Scott guy.
Oh, well,
or the
yeah.
Waltz, or the Bernard guy.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Would you say
it's international.
Guy?
In terms of the print, in terms of actually what goes into store. Yeah. You know, I mean, a W&ALT guy maybe, but there's a kind of there's a lineage of designers doing this sort of thing. I was amazed that apparently that Disney font isn't trademarked, so you can use that Disney font wherever you like and you won't get sued.
Is this not... Are we,
Sorry, I laugh because that's probably very unlikely, especially in our field. Well,
okay, well,
we
do we
probably
worry
never
that
get
designers...
it. But you're right, you're probably right.
Is it a worry that a designer's kind of motif or their signature is something as simplistic as a teddy bear, like a teddy bear print, rather than it being something like a type of craft?
Not at all. The fabulous thing about London is that it's all sorts of designers, and there's a man who wants fashion to be about a kind of cartoon otherworld.
Yeah.
And it's quite often a hard man. Like Bobby's got a lot of tattoos. You know, he's not a meek thing, and that's maybe where the hardness comes from as well. I think it's also a lot of self-expression with it. I thought it was a really, really good collection because it was so varied, whilst also with kind of like a consistent idea.
You're not agreeing, are you?
It's so weird you think it's varied. I find it so restrictive, which is a weird thing that I started to think last season, this idea that there's designers that do suits and there's designers that do sportswear, and it feels like there's these, I guess because I'm a person that wouldn't really wear either of them.
But do you call this sportswear?
I think it's very much referencing that American sportswear.
Yeah, I wanted to actually say when we talked about Christopher at the beginning, like it's weird, this word sportswear, which I find
and
myself
streetwear,
using.
just,
Streetwear, which you kind of have to use if you work for a newspaper because you kind of have to use that
to
word.
describe it,
But it's absolutely nothing to do with sportswear or streetwear, and I long for the day in however many decades time where this word doesn't, where you don't have to label it that way.
And Christopher this season and maybe last season I think has really moved away from that, but previously, you know, in the kind of right at the beginning, it was much more current. It
was,
But the last 2 seasons, I mean, that's what I loved about Christopher's, both, though, you know, this one very much so, but last season as well, was that it really felt like an evolution out of that.
Yeah.
You know, he was definitely pushing forwards.
When I say varied, I don't necessarily mean what I'm thinking. I mean, if I was a store and thinking, right, okay, I could buy into the teddy bear thing, right, I could buy into the Disney thing, right, I could buy into the birds, I could buy into the brains. Like, I meant varied as in like a product. Like he's building a world and building a rail where there are all these variations for stores to buy. That's what I mean.
Is that what you're saying is a positive thing?
As a positive,
yeah, because that's what I think.
Yeah, totally
Teddy bear was a sort of like starting point, and now there's some other reference points that he's putting into the mix, on the basis that buyers would want more than just a teddy bear reference, and so therefore then they've got more reason to buy in, and they'll become part of the collections going forward. It's very hard for a young designer to get out there commercially, isn't it, and be recognised for something, and then the moment you get recognised for something, you're then almost entrapped, because that's what people expect from you, and that's what you've got to kind of repeat and do. But the natural tendency of designers and very good young designers is to throw all that up in the air and to do something more creative and change the landscape of what you work within. But if you've also had a commercial success in some area, you start to revert back. So when you're starting out, it's not almost easier, but you've got that
free rein in a
blank sheet of paper to just create what your vision is of fashion. The moment you start to drill down and have an audience, then it becomes a little bit harder. Probably he's just in that sort of state of trying to find more of an audience and then sort of formulate his collection to something that represents him in the right way. I think there's some really good things in it. I agree with you. I think it was a bit relentless, that mouthpiece.
Yeah.
It was a bit relentless. It was a bit... shock, I'm over that now. I don't know that I want to see it all the way through, but it's a statement.
Well, because the criticism that would be levied at him is that it's a little simplistic, and I think to do something on every model, a mouthpiece that was so kind of Instagrammable, I think it was perhaps a shame, because I agree with what Charlie's saying, there's more to him than that, and it did just feel a bit too gimmicky.
I've got model blindness, so I don't really ever look at a model. It's really weird. I'm looking, and I don't.
But that was there to look at.
It's quite.
For me,
that's the
was
problem.
Gimmick. It was this distracting thing that, you know, when a model's wiping spit off their chin, I can't really look at anything else.
It's just reminded me as well that during the show I was thinking about their teeth. It really did make me think about their teeth, and it made me think about whether or not his casting process, the teeth were a thought process there. He was like, okay, you look great, but what are your teeth like?
I did think they were incredibly painful, but apparently they weren't.
Oh.
At all.
They weren't.
No, but they looked excruciatingly painful. I think that was, to me, the disturbing thing. But they were made out of just sort of some rubber compound that was quite soft. So it actually wasn't. Because I had to ask that, because I thought, I don't know, that just seems a bit too much. But
you're making sure everyone's okay.
But especially when there was, tears on sort of one. It looked like he was in incredible pain.
Let's talk about Alan as well, because, let's talk about Alan.
I think Alan's had a lot of really harsh criticism, and I hope that, I think he's...
Can we scroll down to Alan? Yeah, thank you.
I think it's been quite hard for him. I think that he came from a point of having a much... He edited a lot of stuff down and out. Like, he did work really hard to get it the best he could for the catwalk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he tried, I think, definitely. And I think... What was your take on it, Alex? Because you weren't a fan, were you?
I didn't like it. I liked last season. I didn't like this. I sometimes feel like it's a bit... I once got told off for going into St. Martin's show and being quite critical, and someone just said to me, you know, they're young designers. They're not... You shouldn't be expecting what you expect from Prada or Gucci from these people. You know, it's their first step onto that global stage. And I think that actually to go in and savage people too much when they're at a very early point in their career isn't really useful. I do think there is constructive criticism to be said about them. And I do think with Alan, last season worked much better than this season, because last season the focus was on doing interesting things with tailoring, and what he did with tailoring this season didn't feel interesting. It felt quite superficial to me. And again, the styling didn't really work for me, and there were issues with the way that some of the clothes were made.
Yeah. I think that was a problem.
Yeah, I think the thing that Alan needs to do, and it's quite clear, and I don't think I've said it to him, is that to really focus on garment and fit and cut and proportion and that sort of stuff. And
I mean, the thing that is
a lot
interesting is to see somebody focusing actually on tailoring.
Well, that's what was so exciting when he came along.
Focusing on tailoring is very interesting.
Yeah.
And like I said, you know, was when Craig did tailoring or did his version of tailoring, that was very interesting to me. So I think maybe why I liked Alan so much in the mix last season was because it was experimenting with the suits and with perceptions of the suits, and you know, that seemed like a very interesting way, and it was done very kind of adeptly last season, and this season wasn't so much. There were too many things that distracted.
Yeah.
I think it takes a very brave designer though in that particular man mix right now, when you've got two very strong designers that you're showing alongside, and your tendency is towards tailoring and it's a different aesthetic, to then suddenly feel the need to ramp it up to be noticed as well. I think I would understand the pressure of that as a designer and think, oh my God, if I'm showing alongside these other two, am I going to get any press or anything? It takes a huge confidence to sort of suddenly do something quite simple and do it well, and that takes time. I know what that's like. It's really hard. And I think he is playing with tailoring, but perhaps it's not as successful as some of the other ones, but there's some things in it, the little skirt. He's doing some things, he's still trying some new proportions and silhouettes. It just tended to jump around a lot with the sort of hand painting. I kind of understand what he was trying to do with the hand painting, but there was a point where I wish some of them didn't have all the hand painting on, and there was a bit more cut and construction. Because I think we're crying out for a young designer to tackle, like you say, tailoring and take it somewhere else and do something new with it. He would argue he's doing that quite rightfully, but perhaps he's tried to ramp it up too much within that audience, and maybe the next collection he'll tame it down a little bit, just with the confidence that he's gained and reaction to this collection. And the fact there'll be another person in the mix. I don't know. It's a hard call when you're trying to be more subtle with things and not.
But it needs to be perfect, doesn't it? I mean, that's the
I
thing.
think that was my
exactly what you were saying.
And I would say about the pink one in the top there, it's not so much the fact it's got the kind of the slit in it, but it's more what those creases coming around the side, or what those creases the shoulder. So it's actually about the actual. The
but can I know I seem to be defending. Being on the other side, creating a show as well, the boys come in, if you don't have the facility to be able to fit a suit on them, you're kind of stuck with the fit you've got. And I know what that's like. We can create a collection of suits to go in our show, and some boys will come in, they've got different shoulder blades and everything, so sometimes that fit won't be exactly as you want it, because they don't have the luxury of being able to cast up front to do numerous fittings on that one model. So I think you have to allow them a little bit of that in that mix, and I would encourage him to just keep pursuing that, the smarter end of this.
I think there's definitely talent there. I don't think, you know, without a doubt. I feel like we are being quite damning in a sense.
I think the problem with it, my problem with it is
I'm supportive. I just feel like he's got a future, and it's nearly there.
But it needs to be cut and fit. And
I mean,
we when like a city on in Milan in the Prada show, suddenly in the middle of it there was a black jacket with nothing funny about it apart from this beautiful black jacket, and it really felt so special to be just seeing a normal black jacket, and so to be shown in London, that would be great.
I think that was my problem with it. Sorry, you go.
I was just going to, you know, his reference for the suiting was the kind of ever expanding suit in the David Byrne suit that he wore for Stop Making Sense with the talking heads. So I mean, the sizes and the fits and that kind of almost, that suit isn't just oversized, it doesn't fit him. You know, it doesn't fit him, and that if that is his reference and that is what he was saying,
but there was just too much. I think that didn't come through. I think that was my problem with it. I do agree there's talent there, and I was so excited to have someone do tailoring, but like this season it was the first time where I questioned if he had done something simple and clean, whether it would have been good enough, because as Alex kind of pointed out, the fits and the cuts and the finishes just weren't there. So it felt like a lot of this hand painting had been put in as a distraction, which was a shame.
I don't think it was a distraction. I think it's more as in that took away the time that could have been spent doing the cut and fit. So it wasn't like...
No, it wasn't like throw it on.
It was more as in so many ideas rather than, okay, let's really focus on something really short and efficient.
Just in support of him, if we're expecting him to pursue this tailoring, which seems to be his world, he kind of needs help to make those suits, because you can't really make them in a little atelier and studio, because the finishing, the steaming processes, I mean, we find that, you know, if we try and make it in our little atelier, it doesn't look good enough. And that's with our expertise. So some young designers starting out, that's a hard call to make that suit look as you would
really
want
good,
it to look.
I mean, that's a whole other conversation. I think in London there should be a different thing from man,
but
which is
I
about
think you know,
it
would be great to support him in that kind of way, so that he gets what he wants on the catwalk, and you can judge him for that without feeling like they might not be made well enough, or the fabrications aren't what everyone here is expecting them to be.
I mean, I wonder if...
Sorry, I'm cutting you off.
I was just going to say, I wonder if now it is actually a particularly hard time in London to work with tailoring. You know, we're so used to this kind of much more challenging preconceptions, and you know, that side of what menswear is, and maybe to work with tailoring, which is, you know, you have a much more kind of understood view of what that is. Actually, to play with that now, you know, the receivership of that is quite difficult.
I think it's hard in terms of British manufacturing, and they're not being British tailoring places you go to get something made, and
it's becoming a lot harder
as well. World. So I think it's hard in real terms rather than kind of concept terms.
I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to speed us on a little bit. I'd like
Can we talk about Peter? That
was what I was going to say.
Because it was interesting, but someone set up on their own who did.
That we had open.
So this was a designer, a label called Peter, which is spelled the Dutch way, P-I-E-T-E-R, and he showed Off Schedule.
It got a great response. I think that's
super good response, and he was playing with dresses, tailoring, that jumper.
Which is from Grindr, I'd like to point out.
Yeah, it's Grindr, yeah, exactly. There's humour in it too, but very specific, very Dutch humour.
And he did tailoring, I think it's worth pointing out. He studied tailoring at LCA.
Yeah. And so he knows what he's doing.
Sebastian Grunen is his name.
Yeah. And it was super good.
Why were you so impressed by it? Because you were really struck by it, weren't you, Charlie?
It was the kind of confidence of proportion. It was the specificness of colour. I particularly liked this one on the side, which again is a sweater with a kind of dress attached on the right hand side. It felt like the beginning of a conversation. It felt like the start of something. It wasn't kind of like, oh, do you like my ideas? Are they okay? It felt very like, okay, here's some stuff.
It's very self-assured.
Yeah, really self-assured.
You went to see it as well. You went to see the presentation, didn't you?
I did indeed.
You were impressed by it.
Very much so. Yeah, very, very much so. And I think, you know, as well as the tailoring elements and the kind of the fit and the form, I thought were great, but also just the detail on some of the pieces as well. I mean, I love the were they actually buttoned down? Did you see with the clasps that were on the?
I think there were buttons.
Yeah,
just
I mean,
they're
just little things like that. I felt really kind of pulled it all together, and the accessories as well. I really liked.
It was great, and it was very small and specific, and that's it. The paintings by Celia Hampton, we should say as well. But like it was off schedule, and he's very specifically doesn't want to do the kind of presumed route of kind of man and everything. He really wants to kind of build his label and see how it goes. And it felt really nice for someone to kind of know what they were doing that young, even though he doesn't know what he's doing yet.
Yeah.
But it felt really a really nice start.
Sorry, oh my God, what is this? Because we're such good friends. I'm just used to cutting each other off.
I was just going to say, we talked at the beginning about gender, and I think obviously with the length and some of the volume and that side of things with the pieces, that's something that came through, but I think he actually did it in a very inherently masculine way.
Oh, for sure, the boys looked, and he was, Bass, who runs the label, Sebastian, he was wearing this look that we're seeing on the right with the pair of jeans and a t-shirt.
And also looks a little bit like him as well.
He does.
Can I just point that out? Did he literally cast his own model in his own
But he looks
vision.
super masculine and
completely.
Bassie's not a short guy, you know, he's tall and he looked really great in the pieces. But to talk about the route that we were kind of mentioning, I'm interested in this because, you know, we talk about man and how designers go through that path, and you said he's super keen to kind of do his own thing. But what options are there for a designer?
Well, have you got images from the installations on these or not?
Like, no.
Because I want to talk about Liam Hodges, who was incredible.
Oh,
it's one of my absolute favourite things. The
Fashionista
Fashionista installations.
Yeah.
Like it was so good. Did you get to see it?
Yeah.
And it was so good. He set up these these lads in around some speaker stacks and put tape on the floor, and he called it like a mini Stonehenge or something.
Go down. So it's all right. It's next to man. Can you see it? Thanks. Sorry, put you on the spot, Liam.
That's the thing. And I mean, this is from his first season. He only graduated from the Royal College this summer just gone. And
the RCA is producing some absolutely incredible designers.
It really is, yeah. And so this was his first serious collection, and it was such a lovely, complete world already. Quite rough and ready. Like there's nothing opulent about it. Like you know, there's nothing, and that's what I love about it. Is it's fashion without attempting in any way to be luxury. It stops.
Go up a bit more. So there's lots. Are you struck by it as well, Alex?
I mean, I actually really like the static installations because I think it's nice to have that sort of respite from catwalk shows, and also I think for designers it's probably nice to have a bit of a respite from catwalk shows.
And they can get their personality across a lot quicker.
But I think if you can make 6 really fantastic outfits and install them in an interesting way, and then people can come and appreciate them and talk to you. For some designers that works much better than that showy show that we talked about. Then, and also then feeling the pressure to have to create 15-20 looks, maybe when what you say is done much more concisely.
I think the great thing with Liam as well was that his RCA collection had fur and it had all this stuff because they can get sponsorship and they get the chance to use that stuff. I'd prefer it when they've got no money. Yeah. What can you do with that? I mean, some of these bits of tape.
All the tape stuff was incredible.
Yeah, but also they're kind of really cheap, like kind of scarf knits on it, and that's what I want. I want to see what someone can do with next to nothing. I find that much more interesting.
Was there anyone else that stood out from Fashionista?
I really like, I can't pronounce his name, but the next guy down, Nicomedes.
Yeah. He's the same year as St Martin's as Craig as well. Yeah. And he's done stuff with Eastpak for a while.
Yeah, those are the bags, Eastpak bags there.
Yeah, those jackets as well, the 2 on the right and the left at the bottom, I was in love with.
I just think there's a real, again, there's something quite nice actually about seeing it statically, which you get actually from Jonathan Saunders. This idea of you see it, especially as a man, I think, as product, and you see it as things that you want to buy, which is...
And especially because he has it literally hung on rails.
With Jonathan. But with this as well, I think you ended up, maybe because it is this focus on garment rather than a focus on a show, and you do see things and there is a kind of desirability, which really is great. It's what it's sort of about.
Can we look at
Kenzo as well? The way that Kenzo kind of at the end of their shows, it then becomes a static installation, and you can go up close and look and examine and really like
season.
Who was it? KTZ who also did that at the end of the show.
Yes, they did. They did that sort of.
It's smart. Yeah, let's go to Jonathan.
Have you got Jonathan?
Montage. I don't know but it's not a montage. But I can just think of the word. Tableau. That's the word. Tableau.
Indeed. When you say with short time, well, how much time have we got so we know how many things we've got? So many full things we need to talk about yet.
Sorry. 20 to 2.
Okay, but all right, good.
Fine. Jonathan Saunders, please.
So Jonathan's so great because he happens. Is he straight after you, after Top Man, or is he? He's
he's very close to. Yeah.
And so, just before Man.
But it's in this really nice time where you go from show to static, and it's this lovely kind of. It's quite social in a way.
You go from show to show to show to show to still. Yeah. Which is there's something really nice about that. Pause.
The interesting thing that Jonathan was doing here was he went from texture knit. So the last. For however many seasons have been about kind of a novelty stitch, and I use the word novelty in a true way. I don't mean as in, but like finding a stitch which has got some different tension and using colour on that to make it into a new pattern. This was about a flat surface and the pattern in the knit, and I thought that was really interesting. I thought it was it made it feel very modern. It certainly felt less like we need to find a new way of doing a stitch.
Actually, it was all very flat. It was like the texture. There wasn't much texture. It was all very flat and streamlined and quite sleek,
which I thought was great. It was a really up collection.
You're right.
And
there was a lot of print as well, which is obviously very much him. But there was print and there was woven into the fabric.
There was print on knit. Yeah, if you keep scrolling, there was one in particular that
there was the Lurex going through it all as well, wasn't there? There was a little theme. Gold.
I also think it was interesting because it was quite challenging in terms of you saw some of it, even seeing some of it on a rack, and it looked desirable, but actually it was tiny multicoloured diamond pattern all over something.
The one with the yellow stripe is that yellow stripe is printed, but it's also then got a rib of I think it's red and blue or something. That was a super complex, and really that was my favourite piece in it.
One thing it was a really simple piece that struck me the most, and I thought it was very witty, which is very Jonathan. He'd done and they're so commercial, so beautiful. They're just these little t-shirts that had a pocket on the front that was done in a pinstripe of shirting material, and the back was shirted, and it was this flatness idea as well, but it was so simple. But this felt for him like such a confident collection, I thought, but such a bit in
a
way.
It's very clean.
Exactly.
Just this really nice cleanliness to it, very simple silhouettes.
There's nothing complicated about the clothes at all.
No.
And the colour's always good.
But there is something challenging about the way they're put together. Do you know what I mean? They're not complicated.
Yeah, it's not quiet.
No,
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah.
That's what's so brilliant about the way he shows, and it's a shame that I think, you know, I always think this with the women's wear, that more designers don't choose to show like this, because it's quite a humble way of showing it. So I think he's acknowledging that he's not kind of, it's not sort of changing every season, there's a real consistency to it, but to show like this, you know, it's great. As Charlie says, it's social, you get to talk, you get to interact with Jonathan, you get to pick up the pieces. If you're feeling particularly confident, you get to try them on. Do you know what I mean? It's very kind of...
I think there's this very interesting sort of group of designers across different cities that do that as well. I always think, you know, Marnie and Marc Jacobs do it in Milan as well, and it's, I think you interact with the clothes in a different way. I think it makes you actually look at the whole thing in a different fashion.
He's also a designer who very much, I think, has a relationship with, I mean, obviously he has a relationship with the press, but he also has a relationship with who his man is and with his kind of audience and his, you know, his consumer, I suppose.
Well, it's great for him as well because he's such a social designer. Like, you get there and
completely.
he's great. You know, he's his own sort of best
PR.
mascot, isn't he? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that works really well.
Can we talk about Lou Dalton?
Yes. Can we go to Lou Dalton? Poor Liam, I'm already
sorry.
happy. We're not making
I'd
that
like to
easy.
talk about Astrid Anderson.
And I want to talk about Astrid. I want to talk about Astrid. I want to talk about Nazim as well.
Yeah, I want to talk about Nazir.
So we'll do Lou first.
Yeah, okay.
She has the same name as me, which I like. And also she opens.
Yeah, she opens.
It's all about you.
It is all about me.
It's all about you.
That's why I always like it. No, but it feels like she kind of kicks off LCM, which is great. And it's so different, again, which goes back to what Gordon was saying at the start. You know, like, everyone we're talking about is completely different. Why do you want to talk about it so much, Charlie? Why
I think it's so good. I think it's just so good. And I think actually the interesting thing was by the point we got to the beginning of Paris on the Wednesday night, that there was the Raf Simons Sterling Ruby show, and a lot of that involved bleaching of fabric, and everyone was like, oh my God, everyone was desperate for the bleached fabric, and it turns out they're only going to make like 50, and that's it for worldwide. And suddenly Lou, who showed this a week and a half ago, is onto a nice winner because she already showed like kind of pale bleached splattered cloth. So I think the thing that was nice about this is that she obviously really fancied the man in it. Like, it had a real sort of like like kind of like sexiness to it. Like, it was and it's super wearable, super desirable. Like, my favourite look was the one above the bleached jeans with the sweater. And a few seasons ago, which was her real kind of breakthrough collection, she did a pair of really plain jeans with a blue honeycomb sweater. And it's really nice to see her
really
not
nice.
needing to do anything else but jeans and the sweater. And
Well,
The coats in this season as well, I thought really kind of, because it's that contrast between really kind of sort of not every day, but obviously like escalated, but you know, lots of things that you can wear, and then those dramatic coats really just kind of stood out.
But she designs in such a personal way, doesn't she?
Yeah.
I think that's one of her strengths. You kind of hinted at this, Charlie. Like, it's always the guy she fancies, but she, you know, she references her partner and the boys she knew growing up, and there's such a reality to it, which I think is really great.
It's weird. I always get the same sense on a different show, but kind of the same feeling. I always get the same feeling at Margaret Howell. I was looking through my Margaret Howell show notes, and it was like, these are the boys that she fancied at school. I think there's that,
definitely.
which is quite interesting in that, you know, from
and I think
female designer for men, it's a very different point of view.
And I think that's a great compliment you can give Lou. And I think she's different in a different world than Margaret Howell, but I think it's that amazing sort of understanding of what men want.
The thing that she does well is make something as interesting as that look effortless, which it isn't at all.
No.
I mean, she's sweated and laboured, and the wonderful thing about Lou is she'll be on the machine. She doesn't just do the collection, design it. She's so involved with it, and she'll be on that machine all night long, machining something weeks before.
And what I love,
and it shows the personality comes across. But it's sort of, it is easy clothing, but it's actually really rather lovely, and that's what she always does so well.
And also Lou was, because she showed first, she had the least hours because everyone had such a problem with factories over Christmas, so she really had to get everything in and done, so she did really well.
I think it's worth noting, because often when people talk about Lou, and I think it's a great thing, they talk about how you know, how nice she is, and how kind of, you know, she's not kind of a Jonathan Anderson, and how showy she is about herself. But I think it's worth it. She's incredibly ambitious. You know, she wants a global brand, and I think that's amazing. I think that's what's so great.
And she's building one as well.
Yeah,
I mean, she's Dover Street, New York, an opening ceremony, and she's also really good at turning her business into a kind of not seasonless business, but she does t-shirt drops for people.
Yeah,
and
completely.
She does like special edition shoes, and she works with stores, so it's not just, oh, here's my collection, what do you think? Okay, bye, and then not see you for 6 months.
She's incredibly
last season, all of the t-shirts from last season went straight into Liberty.
Yeah. Let's move from Lou to another brilliant female designer, which is Astrid, who was amazing. I loved this collection. I thought it It was absolutely brilliant. What was everyone else's take?
For me, I think I really loved it in a way that I've actually not really loved her stuff before. I think this really pushed it to the level that it needed to be pushed to. I feel, because it's always about kind of luxurious materials, and I think just this got that kind of, I know we talked about opulence in a different, but this was opulent in this kind of,
opulent.
this was opulent in kind of Paris is burning opulence.
Yeah.
Like, it was pushed so far, and I say ludicrous, but in a great way. It was so ludicrously luxurious.
But also Baby Step.
Totally worked.
But Baby Step, the thing with Astrid is that she pushes it a little more each season. Obviously this was opulent, but still it's like she's only just corrupted that logo this one time. You know, it's only just, she's got such a set path of things you can twist around in her work and evolve and grow. So, and she's got a client base who are obsessed with her.
Yeah, completely.
And so she has got this ability to, like, okay, let's do a little bit more each season, a little bit more. I mean, the thing that was like completely over the top here were these full furs, which I don't know if we've seen them yet.
No.
It's right at the very top.
Yeah, can we go right back up to the top? Sorry, Liam.
I think it was like the
So
last look.
that one there on the it's a complete full fur, and I have frank conversations with Astrid because I don't like fur at all.
But it's very much part of her heritage.
But the thing is, she is Danish. Absolutely,
Exactly.
that's it. I have a frank conversation about. I'm just not going to mention it apart from to say it happens.
It's cold
but she
in
has
Denmark
but she will actually completely sell that, and it's like a £30,000 coat.
Fur for men also was everywhere this season, which I love.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of real fur, but fake fur as well was everywhere,
Yeah.
which was interesting.
But the thing
Alex
is,
was happy.
but the thing is that she, so she's Danish. Her friends work for Saga Furs. Like
Yeah,
she's in that world, and she has a customer that will sell it. Quite often, fur is used as an excuse for bad design, whereas at least with her, she is doing something completely kind of outrageous.
There was actually a lot of work in that fur. It was, her name was patched into the bottom of it, and there's that whole thing of if you change colour in fur, it's worked into the skin. Sorry, Charlie.
It's fine.
Feel you
it's
like
fine.
bristling.
No,
it's worked into the skin. It's incredibly
Yeah.
complex to do any kind of intarsia design into a fur because it's inlaid into it.
But when Astrid first started, I think, especially in the kind of panels that we kind of sit on, a lot of people were like, oh, it's too high a price point, it should come down. And the great thing is for those who don't care for fur, there was so much else in this show that was of great interest. And
she's got a very balanced price point sort of architecture in her range.
Yeah.
You know,
Wasn't
it's
those
accessible
jerseys?
in terms of just those sort of large t-shirts through. So, yeah, it's a really
She's dipped
well
into
balanced
jewellery now
collection,
as
isn't
well,
it?
Which is that idea of buying into the brand, which I think is really exciting.
But I mean, I really loved the lace this time, and I really loved all the Duchess satin. I think there was just that richness to it. There was but a real depth to it as well. It had a real great kind of three-dimensionality to the fabric, and the colour palette was wonderful, and it just felt really sort of assured, and I just really loved it. I think it just pushed it to that point that I wanted it to be at, where.
And best hair of fashion week as well.
Can we jump to Nazir?
Because let's go to Nazir.
Also,
this is
but also again, completely why I find this kind of streetwear, sportswear thing so irrelevant. Because it's like, it is, but actually, this is the most complex, extraordinary design.
Yeah.
This is like this was. There's a top which literally anyone I can show it to, I obsess about, which has got like a metal patch, then a photo frame thing. You can put your own photo in. It's got lenticular things on it. Like it's the complexity of the decisions he makes. Is that one there, the bottom middle one?
The middle one, yeah.
Which you can't really see, but there's such a complex world there, whilst also being seemingly completely approachable.
I mean, the way that he sort of evolved, when you were talking about sibling, and it's kind of the same, isn't it, I suppose, for NASA, in the sense that it's gone from almost purely accessories to building and building and building. And I think this season, the menswear it literally blew me away. I mean, it was kind of I literally walked out of there like, oh, okay, well done.
I think the thing with Nazir is even when he was making just accessories, he actually sort of knew this was exactly what they had to look like.
Yeah.
Which is, I really like the fact that he's got the guts to expand it so enormously beyond his accessories. And I think his accessories were always niche, and he never really got the price points right. And, they were beautifully made, but they never really gelled commercially, whereas this is, I hate to talk about commerce, but really...
But those price points are now lower for the accessories.
Price points are lower.
Everything is low, the price points are so low.
If you were looking for a collection to buy, I think you'd home in on something like this collection.
We talked...
and what you were saying to us, they're all quite diverse as well. So you're not... you know, where we talked about Bobby earlier on, and like the teddy bear and building it that kind of way, there's so much diversity in that collection. You could buy separate pieces, but it would still resonate as his collection, and still be part of that world that he's creating, which I think is amazing. You'd want to buy all of those. If I was a buyer for one of the stores, I want to buy a lot of that.
There's been a cult kind of consumer, I guess, a buyer for his stuff, and I think this season, you know, and you always see those people at the shows as well. You see that little
they're there.
crew,
His audience is there,
his
isn't it?
audience is there. But I think this show really kind of blew that apart, and he's, you know, still definitely, those people are still going to love what he's doing, but I think it really opened it up much wider as well.
I also think it's that thing you were saying about reading a show, looking at show notes or thingies, and maybe that's because there's not enough in it to then make you only think about that. But this is such an explosion of idea that you don't need to think about.
But I think it's also on a really, the great thing is it's on such a simple base in terms of the pieces. The physical pieces are very easy to understand, not comprehend necessarily, but they're very easy. You can grasp them and you can easily wear them, I think. And that's also the great thing with Chris Shannon, is the pieces are very complex, but they're complex to make, they're not complex to wear. And they are quite complex to understand, but you know, you can wear them without needing to. I think you almost have to wear them to understand them. Is that? And with Nazir, you know, on a very basic level, people love decorated sweatshirts, and the people that used to purvey decorated sweatshirts very well aren't doing it anymore. And what Nazir is doing is really exceptional in terms of craftsmanship.
Yeah.
I mean, in making something special.
But the thing is, decorated sweatshirts is, I mean, the thing with that, the things he's bringing together in that one that I love, it's actually thought and idea. It's not just a.
But that's why you buy
it.
But there's lots of people that will just buy it because it's a sweatshirt with a great thing on, which is great for him.
There's something within it that resonates, I think, further.
With a deeper
definitely.
Yeah. We haven't talked about James Long.
We also haven't talked about Aggie and Sam.
I haven't talked about Aggie and Sam. Okay, all right.
And do Aggie and Sam. So Liam's like getting to the end of his tether. I'm so sorry. Because I thought for Aggie and Sam, I thought this was such a confident showing for them in so many ways, like the mode of presentation, even, you know, the casting, everything about this was so confident, and it felt like a real kind of coming of age for them. It felt like they'd really got what they're about this season.
Yeah.
What was everyone else's take on it? Because I clearly loved it, but it's not about me, it's about you guys.
I thought it was great. I thought it was super great.
It felt like they used someone new. I think I really liked that I felt that, you know, I was seeing something very different from them. I mean, actually looking at it in retrospect, it's not hugely different, but at the time I think
they
felt
wanted
like
it
such
to be
a
that
shock.
though. They wanted it to feel different.
I think it does feel really different, actually. I think
looking back at it, there's actually quite a lot of pattern. There's a lot of colour, much more than you registered at the time. Much more than I registered. I was sort of.
It felt completely black and white throughout, and then there is colour in it, but
they I mean, Aggie and Sam have been on a real kind of like, I think they felt a bit on unsteady waters in that they've had such sort of acclaim and success, but they hadn't yet worked out their business side or the pricing or the how to actually make the thing. Which they've changed
a bit now.
And this collection is the kind of they've brought the price points down. They've got a whole other collection, which is the thing we talk about with J-Dub. They've got a whole other collection of shirts and stuff on the rail, and this felt like a much steadier ship, but then also a steadier ship that then went somewhere really interesting as well. Like it's a. Really,
and I love the way they work as a pair as well.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, that comes across in this collection, doesn't it? In terms of their backgrounds.
Go on.
But I loved all the proportions and the layering, and there was a point in the show I suddenly twigged that what I was seeing was the lining of the jacket was making the sort of shirt look underneath, and I hadn't twigged that at the beginning. I thought, what's going on? There's something going on. And I love that in a show where because you go to lots of shows, you see lots of things, you can put them all into the boxes that you know, and I was watching something and I thought, I don't know what that is quite, and I had to sort of think that through. Nice, and I missed a couple of looks, sort of just trying to make my brain engage with it, and then gone, oh my God, I've got that now, and I wanted to kind of go back and see the two that I just missed. But I thought it was lovely. I love the way they had stripped out colour to a degree and kept it sort of monochromatic. But there's, as you said, there's still a lot of pattern in there. If you look at that, there's masses of pattern going on in there, but it's a very simple palette.
It's that hand-drawn like vertical lines with the horizontal across. It's one of my favourite pieces of the whole season we saw everywhere.
I really, really like that collection.
I thought this was brilliant. This was
really
a highlight
mature and really, really summarising where they've got to. There's
and again, very personal.
Yeah.
But I think hand-drawn is an interesting thing. Craig used the word anti-digital on this release, and I think that stuck with me through the season. I was really looking for stuff that was hand-done. And for them to have kind of pushed so far with digital in their earlier work to then do something that was hand-drawn, I think was very important for them to do.
Where did the prints come from? Because
they made them themselves.
What was the reference point though? Because he's such a great print designer as well.
It was kind of oil companies in Africa, so it was.
They had the two boys there.
Specifically in Libya. Was it specifically Namibia, or am I being a bit?
It was because Aggie had been travelling across like Maasai territory, so that's where he got most of the ideas.
I love that.
It's interesting what you were saying about the hand-drawnness of it, because even with those prints and even them being, I mean, as you were saying, they were designed, but it's almost like they're referencing something which is quite raw in itself. You know, those logos aren't as polished as perhaps we would see in the more Western side of things.
Yeah, but it goes back to our idea of luxury that we were talking about before, and I feel like a new type of luxury is this kind of handcraft thing. You see that a lot in the women's wear with, you know, Simone, people often talk about this, and Jonathan Anderson, but I thought that really came through in the men's, this idea that people want craft, that's what the consumers into. It's not enough just to have, as you said, a statement sweater. Now there's this kind of market for...
It's that sense of the human hand in something.
Definitely.
I think it's one of those collections that just made you sit up and think.
Yeah.
And they're referencing everything that's going on about modern menswear, and it kind of just makes you want to throw out all your clothes and start again. But it's that kind of nice collection because it's obtainable. I think it's not far-fetched as an idea, and you know, you can look at it and go like, actually, that I could wear that, I could do that, I could change that, I could throw that out, I could put that. I love that, because that just really feels exciting. The want to change what you would perhaps wear, which is what this is all about, is selling clothes ultimately.
Their collections don't feel lofty, I think that's...
No,
yeah, exactly.
They're very, very accessible. I think they're great.
Also, these bits are reflective as well. Like, there's this whole other thing that happens with the clothes we don't see here. Like,
there's amazing reflective stripes. That was incredible to see. That was great. No, I thought this was brilliant. And also going back to the thing we were talking about with Lou, with just making boys look really fanciful. These boys just look really great. They just look really handsome. Yeah. I had a good time at that show. Should we talk about James Long, now? Yeah. Sorry, Liam. There's also tons of people we haven't talked about, because we haven't talked about McQueen. It's so interesting that straight away I see the Tom Ford there. Like we hone in on the new, and I think that's what we should do. It's important for London. I think that's the important thing is that we're. Well, these are the designers making the difference long term, aren't they? Yeah. And it's great to have your Burberrys and your McQueens, you know, and your Tom Fords to bring those international people to London. But I think it's great that, as we say, And with James, what a great statement to just take knitwear out. Yeah, completely. Now that's incredibly brave, isn't it? And then it's like starting again, almost, isn't it? And go like, right, what I've fallen back on for 3 or 4 seasons, and then sort of being known for, I'm going to strip out and I'm going to do something really confident. I think he really pulled it off. I saw it in the showroom, and the interesting thing that he pointed out and said he couldn't get across in here is that everything, or almost everything, is reversible. Yeah. Yes. Oh, right. Which I thought was really, told me that, really Charlie, which I didn't know. No, I didn't realise at all. But they're reversible to something quite simple, aren't they? Yeah. So it's kind of, you can wear it either way. It's to a mesh, and then you kind of see the bumps underneath, but you can't. I love that bumping,
but
quilting
also that's done with technique, shearing rather than, you know, I assumed it was some kind of
shearing elastic, is it, that goes through?
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of, again, it's
great. I thought it was fantastic.
And James, and it's interesting that James is also building up a kind of international kind of stockist list. I mean, it is this weird world that we live in, where most of our designers have got amazing stockist lists abroad, but there isn't really a shop in London that sells them. But that's a whole other discussion. But no, it was super tight, and you could really feel like this new energy there that started off last season. And it was really developing on. Here. You say that's a whole other conversation, but I do want to talk about that a little bit. You know, that we have our London designers stocked so well abroad, but we struggle a little bit with it here. Why do you think that is? What's the way we're going to change that?
I think it's because, especially with the young designers, what they do is emblematic of London, and really that's what, when people buy things from London, they want to buy things that are emblematic. We talked, I sit on the Women's New Gen Committee, and we talked about the success of Marquez Almeida abroad as opposed to here, and I'm like, because it's, you know, it's slash denim, it's so what people perceive London to be, and that's why it exports so well. And I think that's really people are buying into these ideas of what young London represents. I think, which in a great way, I don't think that's a negative thing, but I think sometimes it takes, people assume, I think sometimes in London as well, we have quite conservative bias. I think also that it's more to do with like real estate price, and the fact that Pinioli, which was this amazing store on Broadwick Street in the kind of millennium time, which would have been amazing for these designers, you couldn't afford to have a 2-story building which had the floor gutted and just the basement. You know, so there isn't the opportunity to open a store on a whim anywhere in London. I mean, you couldn't out in East London, especially not East London. You know, it has to be like, oh my God, what's going to sell? What's going to, and so they go straight to some boring John Barbados or something. But I mean, that does bring you to the point. I mean, there is LNCC, for example, and they don't stock hugely. Yeah. But their business model is quite
gone to international buyers.
Yeah, of course. But I just,
well, they tend to stock women's wear because women's wear it's an easier sell here.
But also, if they are looking for an international buyer, and as you were saying previously, then quite often the London designers are kind of more current internationally than they are here. That still does suggest why are they not stocking more of them.
I think as well there's this, I think for me, like men versus women, I think people have very kind of tight ideas of what men will find acceptable to wear. And I think that much less in women's, they assume women are much more flamboyant and much more willing to wear bright, colourful clothes. And actually, interestingly, there's a lot of women in fashion that are buying stuff from the young men's designers and wearing that as well. But I think kind of a very I think it is this weird economically minded thing that we can be bright and colourful and exciting with this, and this stuff will sell to men. So let's stay safe.
Yeah, I think also it's with everything that's happened with Man since 2005, since it started. It's a really slow process. It's a really slow ship to steer, and it took a long while to get people to even accept young designers were interesting. And I think retail is a really, really slow ship to steer in
and
London.
I mean, when you look at women's wear, I mean, God, it took forever for that to be, Galliano had to leave London and go to Paris to build a business, and McQueen left London to go to Paris to build a business. That's just what people assumed you had to do. In women's wear, and it's only really in about the last 5 years that people have argued that you can have successful London-based women's wear businesses showing here, selling here, and that's after London Fashion Week going for nearly 30 years.
But I think it might be the thing that I said at the beginning of like, there's so much new in London and so little new abroad. It might take 20 years' time when all those designers we see as big now have kind of died off or become irrelevant for these brands to be able to be stopped. It sounds super depressing, but I think because so much of London retail, and so much of London retail is you have to give us this much square footage or we won't sell to you. Like the big brands, the conglomerates are really
brands that are associated with us.
The conglomerate brands are so tight with controlling retail that it might take for everything to shift before, and then hopefully the internet will be more important anyway, and it doesn't matter.
Also, there are department stores actually which are stocking quite well. Harvey Nichols is doing,
and Liberty does.
of course, sure.
I think they're just few and far between here. I mean, you're looking at something that has worldwide reach. You are looking at the world, so very obviously, you could take every design store in each of those communities in the world, and they could be stockists. If you look at it in the UK, they're few and far between. And then price points come into it, I have to say. To make something accessible. I mean, at Topman, we've worked with a lot of the young designers to try and make that accessible so that we're introducing it back out to a consumer who can readily afford it, albeit a diffusion of what that designer does. But there are very few stockists, so it's very hard, and it will take time.
We put a lot of pressure on London Collections, man. I think it's worth saying it will take time.
The expectations of it are huge, aren't they?
But because it's been so successful in 4 seasons, so we just assume that it's whereas actually it's this young.
And I think there are, as you say, Liberty's Harvey Nichols, there are people putting their money where their mouth is. They're buying into those collections, which is fantastic. And they are selling as well, which is great.
Harvey Nichols really, I think Liberty are doing a great job, but I think Harvey Nichols are also, when you actually look at what they're stocking now, they really are going for it. I think, But also we should also say other shop as well on which doesn't get so much on Kingly Street. And Browns.
They had because they had Craig's first collection, and they almost sold out of everything. And they really
Machine really support.
As well. Exactly. There are stores, so we should they should give credit, but there's not like a
I'm conscious that Alex is going to miss his train, so I will wrap up. There are so many people we didn't talk about. We didn't really address any of the tailoring brands, which I think, as Charlie said, it's great that we talk more about the young designers. And obviously, we've got Burberry, we've got McQueen.
Richard Nicholl was great as well.
Richard Nicholl
was great. Absolutely brilliant.
Beautiful colour, proportion.
Too many, that's the problem, isn't it? But that's very
what we were saying at the beginning there. They see the diversity of London and the energy and excitement that comes out of it is fantastic.
Is that our takeaway then, that diversity and that energy? Just more, we just want more?
It's what I believe. Yeah. And I think we've been critical of some designers and not of others, but they all deserve praise for actually being there and contributing to this event, because without them it wouldn't be anything, would it? And I think we have to allow some of them. It sounds awfully grand to say allow them to make mistakes, but that's what it's about. It's a learning curve as well. As you say, some want to do statics. The brave ones are doing those shows. You have to hand it to them. They're really going for it, you know.
That's also the beauty of fashion, isn't it? The fact that there is a regular opportunity to learn from before, change, move forwards, you know. That's
and this is now a world stage, so they're even more brave than they perhaps would have been in the past, when you can afford to make loads of mistakes.
No, I think that's a really nice note to end on. We should give them all praise for being brave. It's a big platform, and I think it was a great season. It was a
really
privilege to attend it, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It's a really good way of putting it.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.